This is a scene from an episode of South Park. It shows two characters. One is a depiction of Jesus, and the other is a depiction of Saint Nick, also known as Santa Claus. These two figures are revered all around the world, with millions of children that believe in Santa and billions of people that believe in Jesus. Many feel that both of these figures are fictitious, and today I'm going to show you that these two characters should not even be remotely placed in the same category. South Park is known for making fun of religions among other people, places, and things. And this imagery speaks volumes, and I believe it's an attempt to place Jesus in the same category of mythical figures. On the flip side, there are people all over the world that are trying to convince others that both of these individuals are real. Take this Facebook post of a mother desperately trying to get people to tell their kids to not tell her kids that Santa isn't real, because she doesn't want to rob them of their Christmas joy. And what about the countless Christians that are trying to convince hyper-skeptics and atheists that Jesus really did exist? Just like there are countless atheists trying to convince others that Jesus is just like Santa Claus, a figment of our imagination.
What I see with the Jesus story is a very old, powerful, beautiful, Gnostic myth.
Many people believe that the world would be a better place if others believed that Jesus and Santa were myths. So today, we need to find out who's right. Are these two men in the same category? Let's start by defining what a myth is. A myth is a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomena, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. Here's another definition: a widely held but false belief or idea. Like I said, there are millions of children around the world that believe that there is an overweight man in a red suit that lives at the North Pole and flies around in a sleigh and delivers gifts all around the globe in one night. And there are billions that believe that there was a man that lived in the Roman Empire that had hundreds of followers, performed many miracles, and died and was resurrected. Today, I'm not asking anyone to believe in Santa, and I'm not asking anyone to believe in Jesus either. I'm just asking you to look at the evidence of these two figures and then exercise intellectual honesty regarding their existence. And we'll start with Santa. When we're talking about myth versus reality, there are three things we need to look out for: people, places, and things. Essentially, who else was around? Where were they? What things can we verify? When it comes to Santa Claus, we have people and animals that are said to be around him. These are the elves that make the toys and the reindeer that carry him in his sleigh. And who can forget about Mrs. Claus? We have the place. Supposedly he lives at the North Pole. And we have things, the toy shop, where all of the toys and gaming consoles are made. Based on this story, if Santa were real, we should be able to go to the physical North Pole. And if the story is true, that Santa is real, then it's simple. We would find the workshop, we would find the reindeer, and we would get to meet Mrs. Claus. And if he were really flying around on his sleigh, someone would have seen him already on radar. And if he was really visiting homes, then someone would have already caught him on their Ring camera by now. Basically, we would find evidence that Santa is real. But we don't find that. People have been to the North Pole and scoured the footage of their cameras, and no one has found any evidence in the real world that Santa Claus in his current form exists. That's because the story of Santa Claus has taken on different forms over the years, decades, and centuries, and the current story of Santa Claus is much different from the original and very real person that he is based on, which is Saint Nicholas, a man that was sainted early on in Christianity for the good deeds that he performed and the gifts that he gave to children. Saint Nicholas, unlike Santa Claus, is a real and verifiable historical person that existed in the real world. And over time, this real person was transformed into the caricature that we see today in pictures and movies, mainly stemming from this Coca-Cola ad in the 1950s. Now, what about Jesus? Are we really to believe that he is just another mythical figure like Santa Claus? Or what about how the 2008 mockumentary starring Bill Maher tries to put forth the idea that Jesus is just a rehashing of ancient Egyptian mythology? And this is one of my biggest pet peeves when trying to take hyper-skeptics seriously. And it's because of the glaring difference between how the Gospels are written and how the stories of Santa and the other religious myths were written. That's because the story of Jesus is rooted in the historical and geographical context of first century Judea. It's set against the backdrop of the Roman-occupied Palestine. This period was marked by political and religious tension. The story of Jesus is written in what is called historical narrative. Just like any other historical figure like Alexander the Great, Caesar Augustus, or Emperor Constantine. As a matter of fact, surprise, surprise, Caesar Augustus is mentioned in the Gospels, along with Tiberius Caesar. The stories of the gods of ancient mythology happen in places that are not verifiable, like the so-called underworld, with other figures and characters that are also not verifiable through history or archaeology. On the other hand, the story of the Gospel says that Jesus was born in the Roman Empire, in a town named Bethlehem. And when he was just a baby, a king named Herod tried to kill him. He was raised in a town named Nazareth. He conducted his ministry primarily in Galilee and Judea, visiting Capernaum, sailing on the Sea of Galilee, used Roman currency for offerings, spoke to people like Pontius Pilate, a Roman governor. Why did I go down this long list? What's my point? These are all people, places, and things that are verifiable through historical records and archaeological finds. Rome, Bethlehem, Nazareth, the Caesars, Pilate, Herod, the Sea of Galilee, the Jewish temple, the Roman currency. All of these, along with so many others, are rooted in verified reality. The belief among many is that the Bible is just a fable, a myth that does not stand up to intellectual scrutiny. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Tacitus, Josephus, Pliny the Younger, Suetonius are just a few historians that reference Jesus' ministry, his followers, his teachings, his family. And here's the most important thing about these men. None of them had a pony in the race. None of them were trying to support Jesus or his mission. So no one can say that this was a grand conspiracy theory to make it look like Jesus existed. From their point of view, religions and new religious leaders were a dime a dozen in the Roman Empire. In other words, from the perspective of these ancient historians, Jesus was just another religious zealot that was killed by the Roman Empire. This is what they recorded as a matter of historical fact. Like Tacitus, who said, Christos, from whom the name Christians had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And the Talmud that mentions Yeshu, meaning Jesus, who was executed around Passover for sorcery and leading Israel astray. These are historical references and acknowledgments from people that were not supporters of Jesus, and from their perspective, Jesus was a real person that was crucified, had followers, and did many other things that were either miracles or sorcery. In other words, from their viewpoint, he did something supernatural. Now, I'm not asking you to believe that they were miracles right now, and I'm not asking anyone to believe that Jesus is the Messiah right now, just because the historical records say that he existed. And this is because I believe that everything must be evidence-based. And I haven't given you any evidence that Jesus is the Messiah. But what I want you to understand is that a large portion of what is presented in the New Testament screams to anyone that is willing to be intellectually honest that Jesus is not a myth. Jesus is not like what South Park and others would like you to believe, just another Santa Claus. If you don't believe me, do the research for yourself. Research the North Pole and see if anyone has found evidence of a real figure, Santa Claus, and then research biblical history and biblical archaeology to find out if these two intellectual pursuits validate what is written in the New Testaments. If you do that and you're willing to be intellectually honest, then you don't necessarily have to admit that Jesus is the Messiah, but you will have to admit that Jesus is a real person and that he is no Santa Claus. Take care, and I hope you'll be back for more valid reasons.